Welcome to Last Call with Jamion Christian. Our guest today, Morgan Wider. Morgan, a speaker and author of The Worthy Wardrobe, which is a revealing connection between soul and style. As a personal style expert, Morgan has an amazing perspective with the first 10 years of her career at the corporate headquarters of both Old Navy and Carter's. Morgan also advises executives, entrepreneurs, and college students on how to increase their performance through their image. Morgan and I connected through a class we're both taking, and I thought we need some style conversation for our platform. The way she sees fashion and style as a superpower, I believe you will really enjoy. Morgan, welcome to Last Call. How are you?
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you. It's rare that feel like it's interesting. I feel like basketball and hip hop culture intersect.
Yep.
But I don't know if we talk about it as much as we should about it being about style.
Absolutely.
When I walk around and I see the shoes people are wearing and the outfits they're wearing, it's right hip hop and it's
right.
NBA lifestyle. And so I thought this would be a great platform just to kind of talk through it a little bit.
Thanks for having me. This is going to be fun.
Absolutely. Talk a little bit just about your background. Graduate from Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. You both spent some time there.
Yes.
How did you get into fashion? And how did you work your way into Old Navy and Carter's?
Jamie, and I went to Georgetown thinking I was going to be a lawyer like my dad. And he told me, if you're going to be a lawyer, don't waste your degree on political science, be an economics major. And I hated economics. And senior year, I was so burnt out. I was like, I don't want to take the LSAT. I'm going to get a job. And I went to a career fair on campus and the Gap was recruiting. And I said, oh, well, I love to shop. Cool. And I know numbers. And that led into my first job being at Old Navy, the headquarters of the Gap in San Francisco, doing the merchandising. And 10 years later, working at companies like Carter's. And then making the leap out on my own in 2016. But it all started because I didn't want to take the LSAT. That's how I got here.
What's that corporate culture like fashion wise? Like The Devil Wears Prada is one of my favorite movies. So I'm sure that's a little sensationalized, but what's the corporate life like walking in there?
I make the distinction between what I did was retail, corporate retail. Devil Wears Prada is fashion. And I say that because what I'm passionate about and what I learned in those days in corporate retail is how everyday people shop. Fashion like Devil Wears Prada, which again is also one of my favorite movies, is like, it's high fashion. It's the fancy stuff. Working at Old Navy and Carter's and Oshkosh Bagosh, it was, how do everyday people make the choice between bread, milk, and clothes for their kids? And how do we make sure that they're making choices for our product and why they're making those decisions? So I loved it. I love being around product. If you're interested, like that world is a lot of numbers, but also still fashion. I got to talk to a lot of people. Like when I was starting on my career, my first job was on the men's team and I was the only girl and only person of color. And so I would go out to bars and ask men like, hey, tell me about the polo shirt that you're wearing and where you bought it from. And like, I was collecting data and learning how people shop and their behaviors.
Why do we buy the clothes that we buy?
There's a lot. That is a really big question. And I think in a good retailer or stylist is always asking those questions. What are your hangups about your body? What's your budget? What are your friends wearing? What do you see on TV? What are you seeing on social media? What are the NBA players and rap artists pushing you towards? Like there's the internal choices that we make when it comes to buying our clothes, but then there's so many external factors, just like the same thing of what we choose to eat and consume content-wise, the same thing with our wardrobes. The choices aren't always our own.
Yeah, it's so, I feel like, in the 90s, like the history of fashion. I know it not very well, right? But the Old Navy sort of like comes onto the market. It's like huge because there's a lot of different options that you have in the same sort of style. And I felt like at the time growing up, this was like the first time that you sort of had that where you could go and pick out, like one time overalls are super important, right? So
we're aging ourselves to everybody.
I know we are, right? So, but they're going to come back. Don't worry, they're going to come back. And like when you see that, and I thought that Old Navy was really interesting because again, like you could wear different colors, different stuff, and it's really the first time that was really available readily.
I'm very thankful that my first job was at Old Navy, kind of at the peak time of Old Navy was at its peak over 1,000 stores across the United States. So there was this, a lot of people were buying and consuming our product, and we were kind of one of the first like fast fashions, like before it became trendy. And again, it was about how do you provide quality and product to like everyday people, and that's what a lot of us can relate to, and that's what's I'm so passionate about, is how everyday men and women can feel good about their clothes without having to spend a lot of money.
Yeah. One of the things that, and I'm sure we'll share some parts of the conversation we've had over the last few months is about fashion and clothes. One of the things I thought was really interesting was how you really viewed a person's fashion as their superpower. How do you kind of get to that mindset? Because I think it's really easy to sort of copy what everyone else is doing, but how do you get to that place where you're confident enough to walk out of the house wearing what you want to wear because you feel good in it?
I think one of my favorite things about this younger generation, I'll age myself and say that I'm 40, but looking at teenagers now and like 20-year-olds, there's a sense of independence that they have that I think a lot of us didn't have that early in our age. And I think social media, yes, can be a big pressure. Like you have to look a certain way or buy certain things, but there is, I feel like, a counterculture almost that kids and younger people are like, I'm not going to blend in and play small. And I love that. And I think to get that confidence, it comes from knowing who you are. What is your own internal superpower? How do you want the world to see you? And then spending time in stores, trying things on, finding what works, and like literally finding out what makes you feel like you can fucking fly. Like, like that's literally when it comes to like superhero vibe. When I put this leopard shirt on, it's go time. Like that's my thing. Someone else might put it on and be like, it doesn't feel like me, but it is a very innate, natural thing to try to, like, clothing are just an expression of our insides. And so how can you try things on and just see what feels good? And I love that a lot of, when it comes to athletes, especially I work with college athletes all the time, I'm so impressed by their commitment to being individuals and sharing their own expressive style. It's so huge and so critical.
Yeah, let's go there. Let's talk about the college athletes that you work with. I was a head college basketball coach for a long time, and every year we'd sort of bring in a stylist or a person to come in. Now I'd bring you in.
Yes.
And so but I thought it was really important for them to have a nice outfit or have a couple nice outfits, or even to understand how to dress, how it all works together. Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, a lot of times what we learn in our wardrobe is from our parents or, who are generations ahead of us. Right. And so having someone who that's their specialty, who can explain to you, this is what this is saying about you. Just share a little bit about why you like working with college students, and some of the things that you've learned along the way while working with them.
Oh, there's so much joy that I get with working with college students. I think the first thing that the challenge sometimes working with college students is that y'all are often in athletic wear 24/7, right? Like you get the benefit of like you have long days, you're going to class, you're going to practice, and your flip-flops and your workout shorts and your tee is what you get to survive on. Because everyone knows that you're an athlete, and comfort is important because your job as a student athlete is really grueling. However, I think that I love working with these guys because there is often behind all of the college t-shirt and sweatpants, there is a sense of style that wants to be expressed. And it's my job to help these students express their uniqueness off the field when they're getting ready to go interview for jobs. I don't know what the number is, but very few student athletes actually make it to the pros. And so when you are looking for jobs, how can you build a wardrobe that fits your body? That can be a challenge. Like I worked with gymnasts, volleyball players, football players, track stars. Like an athletic body can ironically be almost a harder type to dress because you're not a mainstream body. So how do you find clothes for women and men that's flattering, makes you feel good, but then also makes you stand out for the right reasons? It's ironic. A lot of times when I work with student athletes, when I would first start working with them, they were so used to wearing only sweatshirts and t-shirts that they're like, when they had to get dressed up, it'd be like a boring black suit because that's all they knew how to do. Or like my mother, like you said, like my father told me to get a suit. That's all I know. But then you're not really expressing yourself. And so how can you stand out in addition to just being an athlete, but using your wardrobe to communicate how accomplished you really are?
Yeah. how do you feel about this leisure wear fad, where it's like everyone can be in leisure wear all the time? How do you feel about that as a
It
stylist?
has its place. It absolutely has its place, and it can be done well. And so, like when I work with my kids, and it's like if you're going to an interview, and if you have, I probably wouldn't wear J's, but like if there's another kind of sneaker that you could wear that is a little bit more in line or a little bit more polished, then try it. Like the lines have been blurred now of what professional business wear and business casual can mean. It's just always being appropriate and not looking too casual. Like I always tell people, look like you made an effort to show up to that meeting or to show up for that event. And if you're in your J's and sweatshirt and t-shirt, that doesn't show that you're really making an effort.
I always struggle. I struggle with this because the generation that's I don't struggle with it personally. I struggle with it when I watch this generation kind of make these. I feel like they're sort of mistakes because the person that's making that decision may not understand your fashion sense, right?
Yep.
So like if you're wearing J's to that meeting, he may not understand, or that woman across from you that's trying to hire you doesn't understand that you're dressing up for this.
Yes.
That's a statement for you.
Yep.
And so I struggle because when I have this conversation with my students and my players, it's like you have to dress up. And you have to understand what that looks like. I feel like that is going to be a pretty big struggle because you've been there. You've hired people before.
Yep.
The decision to say yes or no is such a small decision.
And I would even argue as a student athlete, if you're interviewing sometimes, especially if you're an athlete and a person of color, you also have to overcome a certain bias, right? So if you show up in J's or not looking typical professional, those biases or assumptions about what you may be as a Black man or Black woman, you have to overcome in some way. So like I tell people, pick your battles. If the J's are the thing that you are willing to live and die by and being willing to not get a job over, cool. That's like, if that's your thing, great. Just be aware of the potential consequences that come with that. If you are going into a place that, like, if J's are your inherent to your identity, then don't go interview for places that J's might not be a right fit for. Like but again, only you can make those decisions. It's just a matter of what are your non-negotiables when it comes to your image and who you are.
Yeah, I think that's and that's why we need a stylist. We need people to kind of have those kind of conversations. I'll tell you, for me as an employee who I had women that worked for me as well, I think some of the harder conversations for me that a lot of times I would just avoid would be when I had women employees who were dressing differently. And not knowing
like what,
and not knowing what to say. Right?
What do you mean by differently?
I mean differently, like in a male-dominated sport, something that could be seen as provocative. Right? It might not be provocative for me, but it might be provocative. Someone else might see it that way. My last year at GW, there was all these tweets going around about a female employee at another school, which I think is completely inappropriate. But it was all based on her outfits through the season.
As a woman in male-dominated industries, it can be very, very tricky and complicated of a line to walk when it comes to your style. Because on the one hand, I am not at all saying that you need to look and dress like a man. I actually did that. My first job at that Old Navy men's team. I thought if I dressed in baggy jeans and only t-shirts, like the men wouldn't notice me, or this is my way to be taken seriously. That doesn't work, because you are part of your femininity and whatever you define femininity is part of your superpower, right? Like you trying to be like someone else or another gender identity aside doesn't help. But then, and also, this is not to say that what someone wears can be inviting inappropriate attention. That ownership to behave themselves is on the other person, but it is being aware of the message that you send and a type of attention that you want. And so if there are form-fitting clothes that you want to wear that show off your shape, are you okay with the potential message that comes with, or the attention that comes with? So like, it's a very tricky line, and it's complicated. Like women my styling clients that I work with who are women in male-dominated industries, it's how do you find the balance of leaning into your body and dressing in a way that feels good for you, but then also still not sending a message that you might be here for another reason.
Yeah, I think I think it's so complicated, because we want all people to dress what makes them feel comfortable and confident. And honestly, I just never had a good answer for it, you know?
Right.
So,
and often, and, you know, I'll be candid, like it's often, you know, it's usually the responsibilities on the woman to not make men look at her, but that's not fair, right? Like grown men should be able to behave and to know when to keep their hands on themselves and keep their mouths shut if it's inappropriate. So that balance of things, and in this new environment that we're in of Me Too and increased awareness of these things, it's complicated. It's really, and all it goes back to is like confidence in what you feel good in and what risk you are willing to absorb based on your wardrobe choices.
Yeah, I'm so liberal. I'm like, rock out. You know, I'm like, you know, go be who you are, and you know, the world should adjust. You know, I mean, I think, I just think it's just interesting. I think, and it's only going to continue to grow. As we have more women in male-dominated fields, which, you know, like every time we have like a new woman head coach in the G League, or it's like a huge celebration. I think there'll be one day where it won't be that big a celebration, and it'll be the norm, right? It'll be part of what it is. And I think the more women we have in male-dominated places and workspaces, it will just become the norm. And I think when it becomes a norm, maybe these issues will always exist because they've existed since the beginning of time, but they'll just be more understandable.
Absolutely. And I even argue that the women who are the trailblazers, or if you are a person of color who's a trailblazer in whatever role that you're in, if while you're doing the trailblazing work, if you assimilate through your image, then you're not as much of a trailblazer. Like you owning your blackness, owning your femininity in that space, and how you dress, how you do your hair, how you communicate is true diversity and inclusion, because you trying to whitewash yourself to get in that place is not really creating the next opportunity for the next person of color, the next woman. Like your choices and how you show up are bigger than you, because they set the precedence for everyone behind you to get to be themselves as well.
Yeah, I love the way you say that. And it reminds me of not a woman of color, but a woman who was in a male-dominated field, Elizabeth Holmes, who basically changed her whole outfit, the tone of her voice, and everything to fit into a male-dominated world, and somehow had all these investors and people buying into this product, which was a hoax. And she's now, I think she's in prison. But you're saying you see that? Are you saying you see that sort of action commonly?
Yes. And one thing about Elizabeth Holmes, I remember, I'll never forget watching the Hulu special, or the Hulu documentary, not documentary, but the movie based on her life. When she first started, she was looking a mess. She was too smart to care about fashion, and she was just looking hazard. And her graphic designer said, if you, I'm paraphrasing, but I'm using my own words here, which is what I tell my clients, no one can hear your message if you look a mess. And so like, if you can't manage yourself and your image, then people are going to assume that you can't manage multi-million-dollar investment. So that's when the whole black turtleneck and the red lipstick thing came for her, because it was a uniform or something less to think about, but she was still looking polished. And I use that example of, this is a great way of like, whatever uniform and personal brand works for you, do it. The lowering of the voice and the wearing of the black and the turn, like the choices of what it was absolutely grounded in being aware of who your audience is and how you can match that. And it's always a balance of like 50% of your image should be what's authentic to you, and 50% should be what your audience needs and what's appropriate. And how do you make sure that you're not skewing one way too much or the other way?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And I think it's interesting. You know, it's really interesting, the assimilation, which takes place all over the place.
All over.
But it's obviously taking place in the workplace more than what we know, and maybe more than what we can realize, and
but sometimes it maybe not too. And the student athletes who are listening, and those in the athletic world, your world is also more inherently casual than most other people, right? So like, or in the way that the workforce is going, some folks who are interviewing for jobs may never go into an office, right? So like, there are those dynamics that are at play that it's just interesting times that we're in right now.
Yeah, we did this thing with our teams that I loved. Our players kind of talked about doing it, and then they kind of spearheaded it. They did one day a week where they would dress up and go to class. And it was really neat to watch how it grew as the years went on. because people would then go and try to get different styles and different outfits, and you never want to rock the same outfit every Friday, right? So people would change your outfits up, but then there was this discussion between each other about, well, where are you wearing? Where'd you get it from? Are you thrift storing? All these different things. And I just thought it was like really, I think teams should be based on positive peer pressure.
And I'm sure the morale was different, right? Like that excitement, but you feel good when you put real clothes on, right?
When they were walking into the common space, whether it's a cafeteria or the library, or there was some hooting and some hollering, because you didn't know what someone was going to wear, but you knew someone was going to come with something on that day, right? And then we watched it as it kind of transitioned to other sport teams, and it was pretty neat just to see, like 1, 2, and then 3 people kind of transition it to, it doesn't have to be every day, but let's go one day a week and let's really separate ourselves. Just a unique way. So if the coaches out there listening, if you're able to get your teams to do that, I think that's a great way for them to have a little bit of ownership and have a little bit of fun.
And notice again how the morale changes, and ask their students throughout the day when they're going to class, did you feel different? Did you perform differently? There's been studies that have shown, there's a brief little fun fact. There was a study called the white lab coat study, where there was a group of participants that were told that this painter's coat, like a white coat, was just a painter's coat, like an artist's coat. And the other half of the participants were told that that white coat was a doctor's coat. And the ones that put on the coat thinking it was a doctor's coat, both groups took a cognitive exam. Those who had the doctor's coat on had a significantly higher level of attention to detail. And the study concludes that when we put clothes on, clothes change, of course, how people perceive us, but how we perceive ourselves. So when you are going to perform differently in a suit when it's versus sweatpants, whatever that performing means, right? So like your body and your brain say, okay, it's go time. I got on my work outfit. And just like as a uniform, right? When you put on your practice jersey versus your game day jersey, it's a different mindset, and your clothes are the exact same thing.
Yeah, I would have faculty members and professors and deans come up to me and talk to me about that through different points of the year. And I'd like to say I took all the credit for it, but I didn't. I gave the credit to the players because I thought, what a great way. So I think that impact, like they noticed that difference in what they were wearing and how they're operating. They noticed the difference that it provided in their classrooms. So speaking more to the white lab coat activity, it definitely makes and feels different for many.
Love that.
Let's talk a little bit about, you're obviously an acclaimed speaker, and you also come in and do workshops. I'd like to talk a little bit about the workshops, because this is sort of fascinating to me. If you come in and when you work with student athletes, or what are some of the key things you want to establish at the beginning of a workshop, and then where do you want that to sort of end?
One of my favorite parts about the working with college students is helping them find for themselves a term that I've called authentically appropriate. Okay. And so how going into interviews, going onto campus, it's not about whitewashing. It's not about playing small. It's not about looking like everyone else. I'm not here to tell you to wear a black suit or pantyhose or straighten your hair or cut off your dreadlocks. It is, how can you dress in a way that feels good to you? Whether when I worked at the University of Florida students, we partnered with Dillard's and had a fashion show in the store, and the kids got some money to go shopping. And I put one of the young men, a wide receiver, in an orange blazer that looks very similar to the one behind me. Like, how do you show yourself and have fun but still look appropriate? Another thing that I love working with college students on in those workshops is don't spend your money on dumb shit. Like, how do we once you get your checks, your NILS checks, or whatever your work study check, what are the things in your wardrobe that you should invest in? And by invest, I mean, doesn't need to be designer, but what should you spend wisely that's going to last, and what are the things that you shouldn't spend a lot of money on? So we really kind of break down, like for men, don't spend a lot of money on polo shirts, but spend a good amount of money on like dress shirts, or like denim versus slacks, like all of those kind of nuances, like where to shop for those things, because you're students, you don't have unlimited budget, but I want you to make wise choices and not look cheap, essentially.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, I think that opportunity to be able to do there, especially with the NIL right now, and with the amount of money that's going to be pushed into athletic departments, I think programs like that can really be a place for you to come in and really work with people.
I love getting to do this, and as part of NILS, like your face and your image is now part of your paycheck. So how are you using your wardrobe to communicate and be hireable to brands to represent that brand on their behalf?
Yeah, you're certainly representing so much more right now than just the jersey number that you're having.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the beautiful thing about the NIL is that I do think over time it will help us separate the person from the player. You know, where I think athletes and coaches are the only people that are one thing all the time. You know, the garbage man is a garbage man at work and he's a father at home, right?
Yep.
The teacher at school is a teacher there and then she's a mother at home, right? Whatever dichotomy you have there. But for coaches and players, it's like this guy should be working on his game all year long. At 24 hours a day, he should be in the gym.
He's never not an athlete.
He's never not an athlete, right? And so I think that's an interesting way to be able to separate yourself from that and to feel more accepted. You know, a lot of things that we deal with athletes is that they feel like they are their sport. And that there is no separation from that. So when it ends, your entire identity is caught up in one thing. And so I like this ability to have style as something else and allowing you to show yourself a little bit differently.
It's about building your personal brand. And I know that's like a cliche word that's out there right now, but in the age of social media and visibility, everyone has to be thinking about their personal brand. And as an athlete, being an athlete is only a certain % of your personal brand, right? Like what are the other elements that you are going to put on LinkedIn, are going to put on social media, other areas of your life? And again, what is your wardrobe and your image going to support those things? It's part of how you communicate who you are with the world. I wasn't thinking about a personal brand when I was 17, 18, 19, 20 in college, but that's a luxury that's no longer available to these students.
Yeah, and being able to have the expertise around them to help them understand the weight one way or the other.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
You know, I want to dive in a little bit. I mean, you know, obviously you have a great book, but we're going to talk about that in a second. But I want to talk about your podcast first. I want to talk about the Worthy Reveal and what you learned. Well, number one, let's start here. Why did you start a podcast? Number one.
I started the podcast because I wanted to have the space where you have conversations with people about times when they were playing small. I think I love talking about worthiness, and I think that why we are all born inherently worthy. We are all on a journey to discover that worthiness within ourselves and live in it, and getting to talk to people and names and rock stars literally and say, like, when did you play small? When did you not feel confident? And what made you feel like you finally own your worth? Those are the conversations that I love to have, because we're all on that journey. I think, you know, again, back into social media, we see people post the photo of the after the storm they've been through, but we don't see the storm when they're in the storm. And we all have that story of times when we haven't liked ourselves or loved ourselves.
Give me a couple of examples of playing small.
They are, in the case of LGBTQ plus people, hiding literally in the closet or feeling like they had to dress in certain ways or hide that part of their identity. There was a client of mine who was a Black woman who told me that she hired me because she looked around one day at work and realized that she was wearing black every day to blend into the conference room chairs, because she hated her job and didn't want to be seen by her white male tech people. That was an example of playing small. Another way of playing small is a woman I met, I won't say where, she started this job, and she had this beautiful head of dreadlocks, a Black woman, and a older Black man executive said, you're gonna have to cut those in order to be taken seriously here. And this was a couple of years ago, and she did. She's like, I was crying in the hair salon. And that playing small was her checking part of herself at the door. I think, I remember there was a client, or I was at a workshop, and an older white man started crying. I'm like, what are you crying? Like, why are you so emotional? And he shared that he was a 20-year Marine vet, but he hid that part of himself because he was in HR and he didn't want people to think that Marines are mean and those are like all of these things. Like we everyone checks parts of themselves at the door at some point, and the more that we can share those parts, the more we really become an inclusive society.
Yeah. What would you say is what would you say are some of the things you've learned while hosting and guiding a podcast?
When I've been guiding a podcast, it is that everybody has a story, right? Very few people, I will say, have self-loved figured out immediately and confidence to be themselves immediately. Like it is absolutely a journey. And again, when you see the models and the famous people on TV, we think that they have had life figured out all the time, but that's not the case.
Yeah, there's so much power. What we say in class, there's power in the pause, right? But there's power in the story.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And, I've enjoyed that too, being able to have guests on and listen to them share their stories and, ask questions that maybe they hadn't been asked before, hadn't thought about before, and kind of having them be able to do that. Now let's get to your book, The Worthy Wardrobe, Your Guide to Style, Shopping, and Soul. In our conversation, I love how much you use, again, we talk about fashion as a superpower, but you talk about your wardrobe and you talk about this connection with your soul. I love that. I hadn't viewed it that way.
Yeah.
How many times I wake up and I'm in a bad mood, so I put on dark clothes, or I'm in a good mood, I put on light clothes. I just hadn't viewed it that like the sign that I'm giving the world is how my soul is feeling on that day. So I love that. I love that connection. Speak a little bit about your book and why you felt the need to write it. I think it's some memoir and some creative story. So just talk a little bit about that.
For me, there was a client story that I don't put in the book, but I put in the speech that I've been working on recently. That was the caveat of why I knew I needed to write this book. And this client was a woman who on the outside looked like she was had it all, and perfect body. She had babies. She had a hot husband. She had money to spend, and I kept pulling all these items for her, and she didn't like any of them. And it turns out that she didn't like who she was, and she didn't feel like she was worthy of being seen. And so for me, I wrote the book because I was like, I need women before they start working with me to learn to love themselves, because until you love yourself, you make my job really fucking difficult, because I'm never going to be able to make you happy. Because if you're not happy with who you are on the inside, you're never going to like the reflection that you see on the outside. And also it was part of, again, my story, because someone might say, oh, she's a wardrobe stylist, she's always loved clothes. No, I loved clothes, but I didn't love wearing them. I didn't like the attention. I didn't think that I was worthy of being seen. I was the only Black girl in my Minnesota public school for a long time. I was the tallest one. I had the biggest hips and the biggest butt at the age of 8. So I spent most of my life hiding in big and baggy clothes. And it wasn't until I did my own self-love work and worthiness work and changed my life that I felt confident being seen. So I wanted women, and even the men who have read the book have said it's helped them understand women better and also themselves when it comes to how they show up in the world.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good. It's really good, and I think really passionate. I've had a chance to hear some excerpts of your speech, so I know how passionate you are about this connection. And so I'm just appreciative you taking the time. We do this thing here on Last Call. It's the end of the night. The bartender has rung the bell, and it's the last call. That's the name of the show, obviously. Yep. On the left side of you, you have someone who's retired.
Okay.
On the right side of you, you have someone who's still actively working. No family. What two people do you have beside you at the end of the night?
Someone who's retired and someone who's actively working.
Yep.
I would say the person who's quote unquote retired is Stacy London. She's a wardrobe stylist who had the show on TLC, What Not to Wear. Having my own TV show is like one of my goals. Stacy's doing other things, but that is what she does. What she did for that TV show inspired me in being a stylist. I think someone who is still working Ironically, she's older, but Marianne Williamson, who is a spiritual book author, speaker, she's a presidential candidate right now. She inspires me from applying your faith and your spirituality to all areas of your life. I quote her a lot in my book. I had a chance to meet her a couple of months ago. And that to me is, again, as me being someone who's so about worthiness, that comes from knowing in your spirit who you are. And I think that knowingness of who you are and that confidence then exudes in everything: how you play basketball, how you dress, how you take care of your body, how you perform at work. That's the core of who you are, is a really important starting point.
I love it. I love it. Morgan, you've been amazing.
Thank you for having me. This was so fun.
I love it. Thanks for joining us on Last Call. We will see you soon. Thank you for joining us on The Last Call, powered by Speakeasy, where careers grow through relationships and relationships grow through Speakeasy. We hope you enjoyed it, and we look forward to connecting with you soon.